Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Pauline. I really appreciate it. Hi, everyone. It's nice to be with you. My name is George Abbott. I'm the Chief Knowledge Advancement Officer for the American Foundation for the Blind. And on the slide I have up here my email address, which I'll give. So you are welcome to send me any email questions that you'd like after the webinar. So my email is gabbott. So it's GABBOTT at afb.org. And our website is, of course, afb.org. Let me tell you a little bit about who we are at AFB. So the mission of the American Foundation for the Blind is to create a world of no limits for people who are blind or visually impaired. We mobilize leaders, advance understanding, and champion impactful policies and practices using research and data. Just a few other points about us. We started in 1921 in New York City. We're now headquartered in Arlington, Virginia, and we focus on systems change through research, public policy, and other efforts, especially in the areas of education of blind youth, aging and vision loss, employment, and technology. Let's talk a little bit about what blindness is. So what is legal blindness? Legal blindness is a level of vision loss that has been legally defined to determine eligibility for benefits. In the United States, this refers to a medically diagnosed central visual acuity of 20/200 or less in the better eye with the best possible correction, and or a visual field of 20 degrees or less. Often people who are diagnosed with legal blindness still have some usable vision. What is low vision? I'm going to give you a textbook definition here. Low vision is a term that generally describes, quote, a person who has measurable vision but has difficulty accomplishing or cannot accomplish visual tasks, even with prescribed corrective lenses, but who can enhance his or her ability to accomplish these tasks with the use of compensatory visual strategies, low vision devices, and environmental modifications. And that's from Horn and Lusk back in 2010. Let me give you one other definition of low vision. Vision loss that may be severe enough to impede a person's ability to carry on everyday activities, but still allows some functional, useful sight. Low vision may be caused by a wide variety of eye conditions. Low vision may range from moderate impairment to near total blindness. It cannot be fully corrected by eyeglasses, contact lenses, or surgery. There are some reasons that we sort of get confused around blindness, and I'm going to talk about them next. One thing I'll point out is that when we're talking about visual impairment, there are two parts of vision to think about too. There's the central vision, and that gives you your clarity, colors, you use it for reading and driving, etc. And then you have your peripheral vision, which helps in low lighting, and it also detects movement. So we're talking about a couple of parts of vision. And well, I'll talk about some of these reasons that we might get confused. Legal blindness is a term set by statute and was defined for purposes of providing Social Security Administration benefits, and other government agencies adopted it for determining eligibility for services. There are multiple ways to describe visual impairment and various degrees of vision loss. We've mentioned already 20/200 as a figure. This is a measurement of distance vision. And what it means is that what someone with typical vision can see at 200 feet. A person who's characterized as legally blind would not be able to see from more than 20 feet away. However, someone who is legally blind may have no vision at all. About 10 to the estimate's about 10 to 15% of people who are blind have no vision at all or have light perception, so just the ability to detect bright light, and that would be it. It wouldn't be useful or functional in any other way. The cause of visual impairment, lighting conditions, medication that someone might be taking, and other environmental and medical factors can affect what a person may be able to see. A person's level of fatigue may impact their vision, and some eye conditions are progressive, so they worsen over time. So what all of this means is what someone sees in the morning might not be the same thing they see in the afternoon. Maybe the lighting is different. Maybe their eyes are tired because of the eye condition or the tasks they've been performing. Maybe someone you met a year ago who you thought could see pretty well, or you didn't even know had a visual impairment, now seems to be struggling with some visual tasks. There's obviously a lot going on here that impacts vision. Let's talk a little bit about some demographics and statistics. So according to the World Health Organization, 285 million people on the planet have a significant visual impairment. About 15% are blind and 85% have some usable vision. According to data from the 2017 National Health Interview Survey, 26.9 million American adults age 18 and older reported experiencing vision loss. About 61% are female and 39% male. Here's a pretty important figure for us. 19.1 million people between the of the people who reported this vision impairment, 19.1 million were between the ages of 18 and 64. So right in our working population. The term vision loss refers to individuals who reported that they have trouble seeing even when wearing glasses or contact lenses, as well as by individuals who reported that they are blind or unable to see at all. And this estimate pertains to a nationally representative sample of the non-institutionalized civilian population over age 18. And I should say also that the CDC estimates that over 3.3 million Americans age 40 and older are considered legally blind or have low vision. So let me share with you the four most common causes of visual impairment in adults. They are, and you've heard of all of these, I bet. You have cataracts, diabetic retinopathy, glaucoma, and macular degeneration. And these are all primarily age-related eye conditions. So briefly, to talk about cataracts, this is when the lens of the eye becomes cloudy or opaque. They generally form slowly and without pain. They can affect one eye or both eyes. Images may appear blurry or fuzzy, or colors seem faded. Cataracts affect more than 50% of all adults by age 80 and are the primary cause of vision loss in people 55 and older. On the next slide, I'm going to show you an example of a view through a lens with cataract. So here's that image. Next, we'll talk about diabetic retinopathy. This is when there are changes in the tiny blood vessels of the retina, and that can lead to vision loss. Strict control of blood sugar levels helps prevent diabetic retinopathy. So very important to control those sugars and to see eye doctors with this condition. The CDC reports that diabetic retinopathy is the leading cause of visual impairments of working age Americans. And on the next slide, we'll show you a view of the condition of diabetic retinopathy. The third is glaucoma. This is when the pressure of the fluid inside the eye is too high, resulting in a loss of peripheral vision. Increased pressure can damage the optic nerve and eventually lead to blindness. It often progresses with no symptoms or warning signs. And here's a slide showing a view with glaucoma. And lastly, we'll talk about something that you're probably familiar with, especially if you have older parents or grandparents, macular degeneration. This is a dysfunction of the part of the retina that makes possible the sharp central vision, and that's the vision that we need for reading, for driving. It helps us with recognizing faces and distinguishing colors. Blurred, distorted, or dim vision in the center of the visual field. Peripheral vision is generally not affected. It's painless and may even progress so gradually that the affected person um, notices little change. And this slide has a view with macular degeneration. So now let's talk a little bit about visual impairment and employment. A few things to know. People with visual impairments are employed at a far lower rate than the rest of the population and have substantially lower incomes. Many work part-time or only part of the year. Now, this may be by choice. It also may be because that's all they can get. It's estimated that nearly 70% of working age adults with visual impairments are unemployed or underemployed. As of July 2018, 29% of Americans with disabilities aged 16 to 64 participated in the workforce. And this is compared with 75% of those without disabilities. Let's talk about some factors that may contribute to this deplorable employment rate. One possibility is misconceptions about and discomfort with visual impairment by employers. And when I say employers, I'm really talking about society. Um, Sometimes people just aren't comfortable with individuals who have a visual impairment. Maybe this is because they have not observed capable blind people in a work setting. Maybe it's the way visually impaired people are portrayed in the media. Um, it also may have something to do with the fact that we're visual creatures and it's not comfortable, or it can become uncomfortable for some people if you're not able to make eye contact with the person you're trying to engage. Another possible contributing factor is there are few opportunities for blind youth to secure part-time jobs. So those typical jobs we think of for high schoolers, for example, mowing lawns, flipping burgers, jobs that require running around driving an automobile. These obviously aren't terrific solutions. Also, parents may be a hindrance. They may not want to let their blind child go out into the community and do this work for a variety of fears. Parents also contribute to this in some way, as I just mentioned, but also they may have very low expectations of the abilities of their children with visual impairments. This may be due to lack of access to blind role models. It may have it may have something to do with, just again, as I mentioned before, with their fears, and also I think we probably, as professionals in the field of rehabilitation and in special education, maybe aren't setting the highest expectations we can in helping parents understand what really is possible. Um, Probably more recently, a factor that contributes is inaccessible application tracking systems. Um, and what's interesting is you might get onto a website and go through the process of submitting an application for a job, only to find out that certain buttons aren't labeled correctly, or you get to the end of the process and the button to submit isn't visible to your screen reader. Um, so there's really no such thing as mostly accessible. If something is 95% accessible and you got through trying to submit your resume, but you get to that button to actually pull the trigger and submit it and it's not accessible, then it's all not accessible. Another problem can be technology in the workplace, including proprietary software that fails to meet the accessibility requirements. Um, and I should say that all of these really can be overcome with education. What's interesting too is recently Accenture, in conjunction with the American Association of People with Disabilities and Disability In, published a paper about the benefits of disability inclusion. And it was based on findings from 140 companies. And they basically made a business case for disability inclusion. After the webinar, you will receive resources, and in there will be a link to the full paper. But I thought I'd share with you some of the findings that came out of that work by Accenture. So companies that embraced best practices for employing and supporting more persons with disabilities in their workplace are outperforming their peers, and they claim that they experienced higher profitability, and the leading companies were twice as likely to have higher total shareholder returns when compared to other organizations. There's also an untapped pool of 10.7 million people with disabilities, and a 1% increase in people with disabilities entering the labor market could add as much as $25 billion to GDP. Accenture went on in this report to further state that companies haven't leveraged the talents of people with disabilities for three primary reasons. One is a lack of understanding of the scope of talent available. Another is a lack of understanding of the potential benefits. And also the third being misconceptions about the cost versus the return on investment of disability inclusion. According to that Accenture study, companies who were inclusive of people with disabilities reported increased innovation, improved productivity, and better work environment. So let me talk a little bit about characteristics of employees with visual impairments. Some of this came from that Accenture report that I just mentioned, and others I added because I find them to generally be true. Because people with visual impairments regularly need to be creative and adapt to different environments. Many possess skills and talents companies value, and these include being innovative, problem solving, persistence. People with visual impairments are often used to encountering roadblocks or being told that they can't or shouldn't do something. So you need to find a way to work around that if you have that desire to press on. Being collaborative um, is a pretty common trait. So working together to accomplish various tasks or solve problems. If they want to be efficient, people who are visually impaired tend to be great at planning and are well organized. They're also willing to experiment, and they're often creative, so the creativity piece. Now, admittedly, this is a generalization, but I ask you to consider the forethought, experimentation, planning, and persistence that someone without vision has to employ every day to do, the most general daily tasks. And I want to be clear here too and say when hiring people with visual impairments, it's not about charity. Candidates must be qualified for the position first and foremost. Jobs are earned, they're not given. So I think that's a really important point to state. And I came across a quote that I wanted to share, and it says, "Empowered companies are not merely compliant or acting out of perceived obligation. They are excitedly embracing the advantages that come with employing more creative, industrious, and well-rounded people." Now, I've also talked with employers, and some have said, I would be very willing to hire people who have visual impairments, but I can't seem to find them. So let's talk a little bit about how to attract applicants with visual impairments. So doing the following can help. First, ensure that your websites and position descriptions list disability in any diversity inclusion statements. Second, ensure that a clear means of contacting someone for application submission and interviewing accommodations is provided. And third, ensure the online application tracking system meets the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or we call it WCAG or WCAG. These are web accessibility requirements that website needs to contain. And whether you're doing it in-house, please be sure that it's compliant, or also make sure that if you are using a third party for your application screening, that you specify that their site must be WCAG compliant. And in the resources that you'll receive, there's a link to the requirements as well. They're very, very easy to find on the web, and they're critical. And if you need help verifying if your site's accessible, or if you need help to create a site that's accessible, there are many companies out there that do it. AFB Consulting, it's an arm of American Foundation for the Blind, is one such provider, but there are others as well. Some other ways to attract talent that happens to be blind. One is to encourage acceptance of people with visual impairments for internships. When you're out recruiting at the universities, embrace people with disabilities and with visual impairments. Invite them in, have them be a part of your organization. Connect with local offices of the State Vocational Rehabilitation Agency. Most major cities have an office. Partner with community-based organizations on blindness. You can learn about initiatives from two of the leading advocacy groups for people who are blind, and that's the American Council of the Blind, ACB, and their website's acb.org, and the National Federation of the Blind, NFB, and their website is nfb.org. You can also get involved with Disability In. They have chapters all around the country. They are a terrific resource, and they have a nice network of corporations who work with them. And let's definitely not overlook getting hired.com. Also, great resources for you to tap into, and they can consult with you as well. And there are some companies out there that really are excellent role models at disability inclusion. One that comes to mind is JP Morgan Chase and Company. They really do a great job because they've built a strong team to assist hiring managers. They have a system to handle accommodations requests. They have buy-in on disability inclusion from the top of the organization. These are all really important. Bank of America has a strong team, and one of the things they do is to promote developing relationships with the nonprofit community-based organizations in their major markets. So they're doing a lot of local work too. Other companies recognized for their work in disability inclusion, Northrop Grumman, Microsoft, Google, and frankly, I could mention dozens and dozens more. So again, look at Disability In and look at gettinghired.com, and I think you'll find some really great examples out there. And these companies often state how they are willing to share their best practices. So now we're in the part of interviewing someone who's visually impaired. How about let's talk a little bit about tips for interviewing and some etiquette. And I included this because I know People sometimes feel uncomfortable talking with people who are visually impaired, and it's mostly because they're concerned about offending them in some way, or creating an awkward situation unintentionally. So the first point I'd like to make is remain calm and relaxed. That's the first step. And then next, it is perfectly fine for you to ask the candidate to let you know how you can best help them. What do they need from you? Put the ball in their court and ask them to share with you their needs. You don't need to guess. And I want to reassure you that it's perfectly fine to use words like look, see, and watch. These are part of our everyday language, and it's perfectly fine to say, did you watch the ball game last night? Um, it's far more awkward if you start to stumble over trying to avoid those words that come out so naturally. So I say, be comfortable with those words, and it's okay. If you're walking from one location to another, you can offer your elbow, allowing you to serve as a guide. Now, please don't be offended if the person doesn't take your elbow. They may want to follow with their dog. They may have enough vision to see you and follow. They may not have enough vision, but frankly just want to use their white cane to learn about the environment that they're navigating through. There could be a lot of reasons. So it's personal preference. There's no harm in offering it, and a person can feel comfortable taking your elbow or not, and that's okay. But that's a really nice tip to know if you're getting up to move, say, to a different building. If the candidate has a dog guide, avoid petting, distracting, or feeding the service animal. Now, I know this is really hard for some of you who are animal lovers, but it's really important. When that dog is in harness, they are working. That's their uniform. And generally, dogs know that when they're wearing the harness, they're performing a duty, and you don't want them to get used to being distracted. Um, and you could think about the ramifications of that if a dog starts to look for petting and connect with the person who's in the room with them who's not their handler. Then what happens when the person who's with their dog at a busy street corner is trying to cross the street and the dog gets distracted by other people? So that's just one reason you don't want to do it. Now, at some point, if it's appropriate and you feel like asking the person if you're allowed to pet their dog, they may say yes, and then they would probably take the dog's harness off and allow you to pet it. They may say no because they don't want the dog to get used to that social time in that particular spot. So again, depends on the person, depends on the situation, but please ask, but definitely avoid distracting, petting, or feeding the service animal. If there will be documentation or forms to read during the interview process, or items that need to be filled out while you're together, it actually might be best to send them by email in advance. Um, this allows a person the time and the use of their technology, which they may not have with them, to handle reviewing those forms and completing them, if that's necessary. And I would also encourage you to ask them what file types they prefer. A lot of times we're inclined to just send a PDF file, but although PDFs can be accessible, they often are not very accessible and can create some problems. So do ask the person the file type that works best for them with their technology. I will ask you to please ask the blind candidate the exact same questions being asked of all other candidates. It's appropriate, it's fair, it's the right thing to do. And on the other hand, respect the person with a visual impairment by avoiding questions you do not ask other candidates, like how would you get to work every day? Let's talk a little bit about accommodations. Most accommodations cost nothing, and I'll show you, I'll mention some examples of that shortly. Many cost under $500. Some cost well over $500. You can consult with your local vocational rehabilitation agency and also involve the employee when you're trying to figure out a solution. Oftentimes, they already know the best tools and solutions or have the network of resources that can provide the guidance you need. Also, support accommodations from a central budget, not from a hiring manager's budget, not from a department's budget, because this is really a disincentive to being inclusive of people with disabilities if a department's going to be penalized for hiring someone with a disability. So here are some examples of accommodations. Sometimes it's really just as simple as positioning a desk near a window for more natural light. Certain eye conditions do really well with that great natural light coming through a big window. Other times it's adjusting blinds to reduce the glare. Providing a larger monitor is useful to many people, or using an adjustable arm that allows a monitor to be repositioned easily. Accommodation is purchasing screen reader software or screen magnification software, or some hardware devices like refreshable braille displays and braille embossers. Some of you may be wondering, what are these? Well, a screen reader is a software. It's a piece of software that works on a computer, and it's verbalizing the text that appears on the screen. As you move through with the cursor or the pointer, it's reading the text. And it also, they tend to give you several extra layers of commands so that you can either move to another part of the screen quickly or solicit information from other parts of the screen without moving your cursor. And this helps you whether you're in a PowerPoint slides, so a slide deck, or in an Excel spreadsheet, I should say spreadsheets, presentation software, word processing, email, or on the internet. These are really great tools, and they are effective in just about every situation. And most people who are visually impaired using them crank up the speed quite a bit, and they could be very efficient. Plus, they know their commands that help them navigate, even keystrokes for the applications themselves to allow them to be more efficient. Then you have screen magnification software, and it's really what it sounds like. This is where text on the screen can be magnified very quickly to a much larger size. Um, it also allows for a quick change of background and foreground colors and different settings for panning through the text in different ways. Again, all designed to help someone with a variety of eye conditions where they have some usable vision, but need some changes in the lighting and the size of the text. A refreshable braille display is a hardware device that's attached to the computer or done through Bluetooth. And what it's doing is it's representing a portion of the text on the screen, most often where the cursor is near. And it takes this array of pins at the person's fingertips and represents the braille characters that correspond with the print ones on the screen. Now, sometimes there are strips of braille. These are all one line currently. One line strips of braille cells that could be 20, 40, even 80 characters wide. And they come in quite handy, especially if you're doing jobs that involve editing and you need to check for formatting. Computer programmers are using them. Customer service agents are using them. They're really quite handy devices. And then a braille embosser, it's basically like a printer, but you take a document, you run it through a translation software, and then you export it out to a device that will braille onto pages, your hard copy braille, so that you can take notes with you. In the resources that will be provided, there will be a link that shows some video demonstrations of some of these tools. So now we're hired, we've got someone in the office that we're working with, and now let's talk a little bit about how you interact with people who are visually impaired. And I've picked 3 different scenarios that I could go on with, obviously many, many more, but I think you'll get the idea. Let's start with talking about considerations for working with people with visual impairments. And we're first going to focus on email and electronic documents. First, I would suggest that you use a sans serif font like Arial, Calibri, or things like that. Basically, we're trying to avoid the fancy squiggles or the curly cues. Those add some real challenges to people with low vision who are trying to read the screen. Use a larger font if possible. Perhaps you set a minimum of 12 point in your emails. maybe you can even consider 14. There are some regulations in the US Postal Service for shipping materials that are large print under some certain regulations, and they consider 14 point to be large print. Now, most people I speak with who are low vision and rely on large print, they tend to prefer 18 point, especially if you're going to have a printout, something that they have to refer to visually that's not on their computer screen. Many will want at least 18 point. But as you've heard me say many times, and I'll say it several more probably before we're through, it's always best to ask the person what they prefer, because depending on the tools they're using or the environment they're using the print in, it will depend. The size will make a big difference. If you're doing some work on formatting a document, I would encourage you to go into the styles and use their predetermined um, styles for setting headings for your documents. A lot of times people want to create their own headings with just bolding or underlining or putting italics at certain portions of a document. If you're a screen reader user, it's not so easy to find them. Now you can put some settings on your screen reader to detect changes in fonts, but it gets real distracting real fast. So if you rely on these styles, what happens is when the screen reader encounters them, it will actually say heading level 1, heading level 2, and so on. And this is really important because it helps clarify the structure of a document, and that does give it meaning. I would encourage you to avoid using color to indicate edits, or color is the only means of conveying information. So let's say you're working with some people on editing a document together. It's not so helpful to a screen reader user, and frankly, even to some low vision users using screen magnification, to say, I'm going to mark my changes in red, because those are going to be hard to detect. What would be simpler, um, for example, is you could start the beginning of the change with a double asterisk and then close it with a right bracket or something else. I mean, again, talk to the person and see what works best for them. But that's just one example. What's great about something like that too is for a screen reader user, you can actually use the find command and jump to those characters very quickly and then locate the changes that are being proposed. So it's pretty efficient. Some people do use a track changes type of feature. I know many people have challenges with that. So again, it's probably best to ask a person if they're comfortable with track changes. Now let's talk about considerations for using PowerPoint. So I would avoid making slides too dense with text. You want to try to prevent the font size from getting too small. Maybe you want to try to keep it from going no lower than 28 or 24 point. Use good contrast between the text and the background. The better that contrast, the more helpful it is to people with low vision. Reduce the glare. In this particular presentation that we're looking at, I intentionally used a template for the presentation that has a darker background with lighter text. And that provides less glare, and it's far less fatiguing on a person's eye when they look at slides in this way. Now, the other thing you have to remember is that if you have links or other elements within the slides, you may have to go adjust the colors to make sure that the is good. If confidentiality is not a concern, I would ask you to be willing to share your PowerPoint in advance with the blind user. It gives them an opportunity to review using his or her own technology. It's more comfortable. It's probably far more efficient, and it really is useful. And then I would say verbalize the text that appears on the screen. And if you have charts or graphs that you're showing that are real clearly depicting the points that you're after, please state what those are so that you're conveying the main points of those illustrations. Let's talk about considerations, in the physical environment. So one point I have here is keep aisles clear of obstacles. I'm not suggesting you go in and remove filing cabinets and desks or big objects. What I'm suggesting is that you don't put things in the aisle that normally aren't there. So let it not be a place where delivery boxes are dropped off or where people are storing luggage before they're dashing off for the airport. You want to keep that aisle consistently clear as much as possible. In fact, consistent is a word I'll use a few times here. Be consistent in returning items to their places in the break room, the supply cabinet, etc. For example, keep the recycle bin in the same place next to the door. It's not helpful when the recycle bin keeps finding new walls to hang out on when a blind person is trying to go throw away their recyclables. Put the coffee pods or the tea bags in the same place. Keep the hand soap that's near the faucet on the same side and close to the faucet, or in the same place that it's always been. Put paper clips back on the same shelf in the supply cabinet. Signage. Your companies probably already do a good job with this, but having large print and braille signage for restrooms and emergency exits is important. And another tip I'll leave you with, and I didn't put this on the slide, is if you're visiting a colleague, never set down your coffee cup or other drink and then walk away without telling them that you've done so. You can imagine what's likely going to happen when that cup is encountered. One other point I'll make is if you are in a different location than you usually are when you encounter your colleague, let's say you're in a different building, please, when you walk up, identify yourself and say something like, "Hello, this is Tyrone." It's very insulting to walk up and say, "Hi, do you know who this is?" Please don't play that guessing game, and it happens so much more than you might imagine. Again, if you don't know the best way to interact with your colleague, just simply ask them. I think they'll always be happy to tell you. They'll appreciate that you've asked, and I think it won't take very long at all to get comfortable working with one another, truly. Please don't assume that you know what's best for a person who's blind, or what a blind person can or cannot do, or what does require sight. You'd actually be surprised at how many tools and techniques out there that allow tasks to be performed you never could imagine could be done without seeing them. And I think one of the points I'd really like to make clear before we wrap up is please don't be intimidated about hiring or working with people who are blind or visually impaired. As I said, with a little bit of dialogue, you can clear most things up right away. And no one is expecting you to completely revamp your workplace, all your work processes. We don't expect you to turn the whole organization upside down just to hire someone who's visually impaired. Blind people are used to encountering different environments. They tend to be flexible and adaptable, and they're very happy to work with people. So please do not find this to be onerous in any way. It really should be comfortable, and that's really my point here. So with that, I think I will go ahead and ask if anyone has questions.
Perfect. Thank you, George. We appreciate all of the nuggets and tips that you provided. We'll give people some time to send in some more questions, but we do have some kind of to tip us off here in the last 15 minutes. Now, you mentioned a really good tip about possibly sending accessible documents to individuals who that may benefit for. But a question that came up, as a result of that tip was, as a recruiter, how would I know to send accessible documents in advance if the candidate doesn't disclose their blindness? And I think this is in a situation where perhaps the recruiter hasn't met the candidate with visual impairment yet. Do you recommend asking this of all candidates to promote inclusion, or should the recruiters wait until they know that the person has visual impairment before they request, ask what type of documents they would like?
It's hard to maybe make a blanket statement on this and to generalize, but what I would say is if the person maybe hasn't disclosed and you don't know, you really obviously can't assume. But I think that person, if they got a document that they couldn't use, they would probably reach back to you and ask for a different format and would explain, and hopefully that you would be able to make that accommodation.
Okay, perfect. Thank you for that. And we have another question surrounding the accommodations that you provided and some tips there. The question is, how common is Braille reading for people with low vision in the workplace today? Do you recommend all offices have, I think this is in reference to the embossing machine, do you recommend all offices have those machines proactively or only purchase them upon request?
Well, I would, in most cases, I would think you would only purchase an embosser upon request, because most people, if they don't need it or aren't relying on it, then you're not going to need to purchase that. And if it just sits there collecting dust, by the time you use it, it may be out of date and you need new hardware. And they're not inexpensive. You know, they're a couple $1,000s and up. So um, what I would say is it's really hard to know who reads Braille necessarily and who doesn't. You mentioned low vision. Some people with low vision do use screen magnification software and may rely on Braille. Most commonly, people who use Braille are probably using screen readers. I certainly would never want to give the impression that Braille is becoming obsolete. It's certainly not. I mean, as long as anyone here wants to use a pen and a paper, I think it's safe to say that Braille should be safe and has just as many purposes. Um, when people choose to use them, how they use them, where they use them, that all is so individualized. So I don't think I can make a blanket statement. But Braille is alive and well. It's a great um, medium. And I think if accommodations are needed to make sure that someone feels that they can be most productive by having access to Braille, then that's really important to work on, to provide.
Okay.
And I will share
Perfect.
with
Thank you for
everyone, I didn't share this up front. Um, I'm totally blind, have been since birth. I put together this PowerPoint myself with a little bit of help, because there were some things that a screen reader would not allow me to do with some of the images. Um, and then I took my notes and I put them into brailled them out so that I could refer to them and keep me on track as I went through the presentation. So there certainly are some great tools and efficiencies that can be used.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that piece, George. I think that it's really incredible the amount of technology that we have, today to help people of all different capabilities, all different disabilities, what, the connections that they can make with people, and then just the different tasks that can be accomplished. So thank you for sharing that. Excuse me. Another question that we have here is a little bit more on the culture side. The question is, how do you recommend us cascading this information to our teams? Is it okay to educate others on visual impairments and accommodations if I myself am not a part of the blind community or do not have a visual impairment?
Well, I would say yes. If you have information that you can share with some tips, and again, often the tip is ask the individual who has the visual impairment. That's really a great thing. I think embracing this is really good. And obviously involve people with visual impairments wherever you can. Maybe you have people within your company who can step forward and be a part of it. Maybe you have people in your community who can come in for any special events or awareness, maybe meeting with your employee resource groups. There are a variety of ways to include people also with visual impairments who can give you exactly what their experience is. And then again, it's unique to every individual with a vision loss. When they lost their vision, the type of vision loss they have, what experiences they've had in the workplace and in the community. So it's obviously super individualized. Um, but we can all gain an understanding and awareness from hearing different perspectives. So I would encourage it. And if you are inclined to share information about working with people with visual impairments and sharing some of these tips and referring people to best practices, by all means, I think that's fantastic, and thank you.
That's perfect. And I think that list of resources that you compiled that we'll be sending out will be an easy thing to forward along to team members, family members, whoever would be interested in learning more information. And then again, we will be sending out the recording to this presentation. So feel free to cascade that along to your teams as well, even perhaps have a discussion around it afterwards. What things people learned, how that pertains specifically to your company or to your team. So this opportunity to spread education that way. Definitely don't feel like you need to be an expert in any arena to share information. So thank you for that insight, George. I think there was another question just surrounding talent acquisition. So a lot of our audience members today are recruiters in the talent acquisition space, and then you did mention some resources and some local places for them to find talent and working with getting hired, working with local rehabs to find people not only with visual impairments but with disabilities as well. And then you also mentioned that there are ways to evaluate their accessibility for their ATS systems. Now, in your experience, how often do you recommend companies taking part of those evaluations? Is it every 6 months, every year? How often should ATS systems be evaluated for accessibility?
It's hard for me to answer that question with any definite answer because it obviously depends on how often that system might be changing. Or who's involved. So, I don't think there's a real stock answer for that. But what I would say is I hope that there is talent in-house in the organization who has gotten training and frankly, as you're hiring people in your web and other technical departments to make sure that they've had training on accessibility so that you already have that talent in-house and they know what to look for. But you certainly could hire companies and periodically do an audit. Now, whether it's quarterly or a couple times a year, I don't know. Obviously, you have the issue, though, is if you make a major change in between any, say, regularly scheduled audits, you could have impacted your system negatively. So it's really it's really hard to say. But having talent who can look for that, having the tools that check for the validity of the code, um, those are all things you can do. And there are some resources, again, that I think will be helpful um, to looking at those guidelines or also reaching out to the consulting companies who do this.
No, that's great. Thank you for that insight. I think that you brought up a good point of, kind of asking the counter question of how often are these sites being updated, and as often as they're being updated, they need to be evaluated as well. So that being a part of the system is great insight.
I know many companies often choose to use third parties to do a lot of the application screening, and I would just encourage you when you or encourage those who have the influence when you're preparing those contracts, write it into your proposals that you require them to be WCAG compliant. The more we demand that people follow the regulations and the rules, the closer we'll get to being get what we need sooner.
No, that's great. I definitely can see how that'd be helpful for some of our folks who are listening in, just using that influence, as you said, and just demanding a higher standard for those who have visual impairments and those who have just incorporating it into our regular, company standards of excellence. So thank you for that. I know we only have,
Pauline,
go ahead.
if I can interject one more thing, when we talk about the web accessibility, they're not disability specific requirements basically. So we're not saying you have to do these certain things for blind folks and other things for people with different disabilities. The web accessibility guidelines basically pertain to all users of technologies. So you're not making special accommodations on your website just for a blind person. There are considerations that certainly benefit people who are blind, but there are no regulations just for a blind user. They're for all users with disabilities and assistive tech. So if you're following the guidelines, you're doing what you need to do to make proper accommodations for all users.
That's great. No, thank you for that clarification. Now, I know we only have 4 minutes left, and we can definitely end it with this question. I think it's a good one. Um, this person writes, my company is not very far along or inclusive when it comes to not only people with visual impairments, but people who have disabilities in general. What do you recommend is the number one place for us to start when it comes to becoming more disability inclusive? I think that this is a really good question, one that we get quite often. A lot of times disability inclusion can be, kind of venturing into a new world for some folks and some companies. So, George, in your experience, what's one thing that you would recommend, or the first thing that you'd recommend companies implementing when they're bringing this information to their managers, to C-suite level executives? What's the one thing that you would recommend? Hey, if you're going to start somewhere, start here.
I think there's often power in doing, and following good practices that are being emulated by others who are successful. So I think all you need to do to get started is look at other companies who are inclusive and find out what their practices are, find out what their employees look like, learn about their culture, and I think you can start figuring it out from there. And it has to take place at all levels of the company. Um, Everyone's impacted, but everyone has to be supportive of disability inclusion, just like you are for every other um, type of inclusion that you deem important for your company and your culture and your customer base. So I would look at some of those companies who are doing a great job and do some searches on the web. There's a lot of good information about people doing great things, and they're actually, even the most fierce competitors don't have a problem talking about best practices and sharing ideas when it comes to disability inclusion.
That's great. I know that you did provide some examples of companies who are leaders in the disability inclusion world. So I'm sure that we will have lots of Google searches following up from this presentation. So we appreciate your feedback. But we can go ahead and close up now. George, is there any last comments that you wanted to make before we close up?
Thank you for your time. It's really terrific to know that you are interested in this topic. It's obviously important to me and to the American Foundation for the Blind and the millions of blind individuals who are very eager to participate in the workforce and be excellent talent for you. So looking forward to seeing thousands and thousands more people with visual impairments in your organizations very, very soon.
Absolutely. Thank you, George, again so much for your time, for sharing your knowledge and your experience with us. We really appreciate it. Thank you for everybody who has joined today. That concludes our event for today. Look out for the feedback survey, and once again, we'll be sending out the recording later this week. Have a great day.